佐川一世と申します。たった指先ほどの小さな銃弾を放ったことによってさまざまな人たちを傷つけ
This Japanese man ate human flesh and was not sorry about it. In fact, he became famous for it. His name is Issei Sagawa, and his story reveals one of the most disturbing failures of justice in modern history. Imagine confessing to murder and cannibalism, being caught red-handed with evidence everywhere, and then walking free to become a celebrity. It sounds impossible, but that's exactly what happened. This is the story of how the system failed not once, but twice, and how a killer turned his crime into fame. Before we dig in, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our documentaries. Now to the story. June 11th, 1981. Paris, France. The City of Light is about to witness one of its darkest crimes. Renée Hartevelt was everything Issei Sagawa believed he wasn't. At 25, she was tall, beautiful, and brilliant. A Dutch literature student fluent in multiple languages, she moved through the world with the confidence that Sagawa desperately envied. She was studying at the Sorbonne, living the kind of intellectual life that seemed effortless to her but impossible to him. Sagawa was her opposite in almost every way. Barely 5 feet tall, frail and awkward, he lived in the shadows of his own insecurities. But behind his shy exterior lurked something far more sinister than social anxiety. For years, he had been nurturing a fantasy so disturbing it defied comprehension. He didn't just want to be close to beautiful women. He wanted to consume them, literally. He believed that by eating their flesh, he could absorb their beauty, their confidence, their very essence. It was a delusion that had been growing inside him like a cancer, waiting for the right moment to manifest. That moment came when he invited Renée to his apartment under the pretense of helping him translate some German poetry. She trusted him. After all, what harm could this small, awkward classmate possibly pose? Renée arrived at Sagawa's apartment that evening, with no idea she was walking into a trap years in the making. She settled at his desk, ready to work on the translation, completely unaware that her host was preparing to act out his most twisted fantasy. Sagawa had planned every detail. He retrieved a rifle he had purchased specifically for this moment. As Renée sat focused on the poetry, completely absorbed in her work, Sagawa positioned himself behind her. The rifle was aimed at the back of her neck. One pull of the trigger, and Renée Hartevelt's life ended instantly. But for Sagawa, this was just the beginning. He spent the next several minutes simply looking at her body, as if trying to process the reality of what he had accomplished. Then, methodically, he began to undress her. He later claimed he was struck by how beautiful she looked, even in death. Over the next 48 hours, Sagawa transformed from killer to cannibal. He retrieved a sharp knife from his kitchen and began to cut into Renée's flesh. He wasn't frenzied or out of control. He was deliberate, almost clinical in his approach. He started with her hip, slicing away pieces of flesh that he would later cook and consume. He described the texture, the taste, with a disturbing level of detail that he would later share with the world. Some pieces he ate raw, claiming he wanted the full experience. Others he cooked, experimenting with different preparations as if he were trying out a new recipe. Throughout this horrific process, Sagawa took photographs. He documented his crime like a trophy hunter, capturing images that would later become evidence of his unthinkable acts. He even spoke to Renée's corpse, thanking her for allowing him to fulfill his fantasy. He stored portions of her body in his refrigerator, planning to continue his grotesque feast over several days. In his mind, he was finally absorbing the beauty and vitality he had always craved. He believed he was becoming more than he had ever been. But reality has a way of intruding on even the most deranged fantasies. After 2 days of living with his crime, Sagawa knew he had to dispose of the evidence. He placed Renée's remaining body parts into 2 large suitcases, planning to dump them in a remote location where they would never be found. Here's where his careful planning fell apart. Despite years of preparation for the murder itself, Sagawa had given little thought to the aftermath. He was, quite simply, terrible at being a criminal. Late at night, he dragged the heavy suitcases to Bois de Boulogne, a large park on the outskirts of Paris. The cases were heavier than he had anticipated, and his small frame struggled with the weight. He was forced to rest multiple times, creating a scene that drew attention from late-night park visitors. When he finally reached a small pond, he attempted to dispose of the cases. But instead of throwing them far into the water where they might sink unnoticed, he simply left them near the water's edge. It was an act of either supreme arrogance or complete incompetence. Witnesses saw everything. A small, strange man struggling with heavy luggage in the middle of the night, acting suspiciously near the water. They reported what they had seen to authorities. The next morning, police discovered the suitcases. What they found inside would haunt investigators for years to come. When police arrived at Sagawa's apartment, they expected to find a man in hiding, someone desperate to avoid capture. Instead, they found someone who seemed almost relieved to see them. Sagawa didn't run. He didn't lie. He didn't even hesitate. "Yes," he said calmly when they asked about Renée Hartevelt. "I killed her. I ate her. It was something I had wanted to do for a very long time." The confession was so straightforward, so matter-of-fact, that it caught investigators off guard. Here was a man admitting to one of the most heinous crimes imaginable with the same tone someone might use to describe their lunch plans. He walked them through every detail of the crime, from the initial planning to the final disposal attempt. He showed them the photographs he had taken. He explained his motivations with a chilling clarity that suggested he had thought about this moment many times. The case seemed open and shut. A full confession, physical evidence, witnesses to the disposal attempt. Surely, justice would be swift and certain. But the French legal system was about to encounter something it wasn't prepared for. French psychiatrists examined Sagawa and reached a conclusion that would change everything. He was legally insane. In their assessment, no rational person could commit such acts. The very nature of his crime was proof of his mental incompetence. This diagnosis meant that Sagawa could not stand trial. Instead of facing a judge and jury, he was committed to a psychiatric hospital for treatment. The families of victims, the public, even some investigators were outraged, but the law was clear. Articulate explanations of his actions and his apparent understanding of right and wrong. But understanding and sanity are not the same thing in the eyes of the law. Then, in 1984, French authorities made a decision that would shock even seasoned legal experts. They decided to deport Sagawa back to Japan, effectively washing their hands of the case. When Sagawa arrived in Japan, he underwent another psychiatric evaluation. This time, the results were dramatically different. Japanese doctors concluded that he was not insane. He understood his actions, comprehended the consequences, and was fully capable of standing trial. But here's where the system revealed a fatal flaw. Since the French courts had already dismissed the charges due to insanity, Japanese courts couldn't retry him for the same crime. All the evidence remained in France, and French authorities had closed the case. Sagawa found himself in legal limbo. Too sane to remain in psychiatric care, but unable to be tried for his crimes. After a brief period of observation, he was simply released. The man who had confessed to murder and cannibalism walked out of custody a free man, with no restrictions, no monitoring, and no consequences for his actions. Most criminals try to disappear after escaping justice. Sagawa did the exact opposite. He embraced his notoriety and turned it into a career. Japanese audiences were simultaneously horrified and fascinated. Here was a real-life monster, not hiding in the shadows but sitting in television studios, calmly discussing the most taboo subject imaginable. He appeared in films, wrote restaurant reviews, and even created artwork inspired by his crime. He posed with raw meat in photo shoots, seeming to mock both his victim and the justice system that had failed to hold him accountable. For Renée Hartevelt's family, watching Sagawa profit from their daughter's murder was a secondary trauma that lasted decades. For more than 40 years, Sagawa lived as a free man in Tokyo. He had an apartment, a social life, and a steady income from his various media appearances and publications. He dated women, formed friendships, and moved through society as if he were any other citizen. He continued to give interviews well into the 2000s, always willing to discuss his crime with reporters and documentary filmmakers from around the world. He never showed remorse, never expressed regret, and never acknowledged the pain he had caused. His health began to decline in his later years. Diabetes, strokes, and other ailments eventually confined him to a wheelchair. The man who had once consumed human flesh was now dependent on others for his most basic needs. On November 24, 2022, Issei Sagawa died of pneumonia at the age of 73. He had lived more than 4 decades as a free man after committing one of the most disturbing crimes in modern history. Renée Hartevelt was 25 years old when she died. She had her whole life ahead of her, dreams to pursue, contributions to make to the world. Instead, she became the victim of a man's twisted fantasy and then the subject of his profitable celebrity. Her family never received justice. Her killer never faced trial. And for decades they had to watch as he turned their tragedy into his triumph. The case raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of justice, the reliability of psychiatric diagnosis across different cultures, and the responsibility of legal systems to protect both victims and society. Sagawa's story became a cautionary tale about what happens when the system fails. It shows how a single individual can slip through cracks in international law and emerge not just unpunished, but rewarded. Today, Sagawa is remembered not as a cautionary tale about mental illness or criminal justice, but as the cannibal who got away with murder. His name appears in true crime documentaries, academic studies on criminal justice failures, and discussions about the limits of international law. To never miss any of our stories, remember to subscribe to our channel and click on the video on your screen to watch the next story.